Humilton, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Library Association, and I'd like to welcome you all to our meet and greet, our One Book New Jersey authors, celebrating New Jersey's 350th anniversary. This is a very special One Book New Jersey program for us. We decided to work with our History and Preservation section and others in our association to identify key works that kind of summarize what New Jersey's been like for the past 350 years. What the History and Preservation section did was look at the list of 100 books which was selected by the Commission for the 350th anniversary. And they looked at that list and tried to pick a book that was sort of representative in each one of the areas that I think New Jersey is most noted for. That would be our arts, that would be our innovation, that would be our political landscape in one way or the other, and that would also be in our children's work and what is important to our children. So one of the things that we did, we have been funded by the New Jersey State Library and the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. And this year we sent out a flyer to all the libraries in our state, advertising the four books that we have chosen as our One Book New Jersey books this year, to let them know about them and why we think they're so representative of what the 350th anniversary of New Jersey is all about. So we're very pleased today that we have our meet and greet authors here today to talk about their works and their importance to New Jersey. I would like to start with Kate Ogden, a professor of art at Stockton University, and she is going to be talking about Shahn, who is a really noted New Jersey artist, and he actually did most of his work not too far from here in Roosevelt, New Jersey. So Kate, would you like to take us through? Thank you.
As you know, I'm not the author of the book on Shahn, but I do teach American art at Stockton College, and I wanted to present a life in art. It's about Shahn and his art. Although I do write about art, I'm more the picture person for today. So trying out the remote. My first few slides have a little bit of factual information, which I'll just repeat. I know that you can all read it, and this is the danger of PowerPoint, that we don't want to put too many words on each slide. But this is an image of Shahn. As you see, he was born in Lithuania in 1898, and his parents were Jewish, which was a very important fact in his art and in his life. He came to the US in 1906 when he was a child with his mother and two siblings. Initially, he thought he would study biology in New York City at NYU, and started working in a lithography shop. If anybody knows anything about lithography, it's a printmaking form. It's a means of using big stone block, although nowadays we use a metal plate, and making an image on the stone that then is printed onto paper with ink. So it's a multiple making process, and this is important to Shahn's work because later on he made quite a few prints and prints of his paintings. This is an early photograph of him in the shop. He's the man right in the center, standing and staring at the photographer. So starting in biology and then deciding, no, I really love art. His family, I don't know if any of you read the Shahn book. But his family had various members who were artistic in various ways. They crafted objects, they made things, and he was interested in going into art, so he studied first at City College and then at the National Academy of Design, which is a place I love, but I can imagine that for him it was very, very traditional and old-fashioned, and it wasn't what he wanted to do at all. In 1924, he married. This serves as a little bit of a cheat sheet for me too. He married Tilly Goldstein, a nice Jewish girl. It was a romance of two young people, and in the end it didn't last. She wasn't his long-term life partner, but they had two children together. I'm skipping over the 20s, which was a period in which he and Tilly traveled a lot, went to Europe a couple times. He practiced his art, he took classes, and grew as an artist. And I'm jumping right to an interesting moment in his career when he helped Diego Rivera. Rivera was a Mexican muralist, and in the 20s, 30s, 40s, we had several major Mexican muralists painting here in the United States and making murals for various buildings. This is the famous or infamous Rockefeller Center mural. It's a Diego Rivera composition. Ben Shahn was only an assistant, but I think he learned both mural process and ideas about organizing mural compositions. I put in a slide of Diego and his lovely wife, Frida Kahlo. Nowadays, more people know Frida Kahlo. Madonna collects Frida Kahlo. Lots of people know Frida Kahlo. So here is her portrait of herself with her husband. And yes, he was that tall and she was that short. Cute couple. So back to the mural briefly. Here's the problematic part. Diego Rivera included Lenin, and the Rockefellers weren't entirely happy with this, and Mr. Rockefeller left it up to the engineering architectural firm as to whether it stayed or not. But there are letters still in existence back and forth between the Rockefellers and Diego Rivera saying, I think you should take Lenin out. No, I don't want to take Lenin out. Lenin's important, but I'll add Abraham Lincoln to balance things. Would that be a good compromise? And ultimately they decided they didn't want Lenin, even if Abe was included. There's the close-up of the Lenin detail. So the whole mural came down. It was covered at first and then it was removed. And we only have color photographs of it because Diego Rivera copied the entire composition for a location in Mexico City. Here he is with the love of his life. I realize this isn't the point at which they got married. They got married in 1935. Bernarda Bryson was an artist, but she wasn't Jewish. She was Christian. And some people have supposed that for Shahn it was one means in which he was able to get away from his childhood, his foreign childhood, the religion of his youth, and enter sort of broader stage in the United States. But here they are with, later in life with artwork. One of my text slides, photographs for the FSA. Roy Stryker ran a section of the Farm Security Administration, the Standard Oil of New Jersey company of photographs. This was the Great Depression. Ben Shahn was hired as a photographer. He did work in a number of two-dimensional formats, including photography. He was a friend of Walker Evans, who's maybe more famous as an FSA, WPA era photographer. So I put in just a few of his Depression-era photographs. These are from a series in Boone County, Arkansas. Come on in. And they're very like Walker Evans. They're very like Dorothea Lange. They're like the other documentary photographers of the 1930s, early 40s, who documented farm situations and family situations and the Dust Bowl and the events of the Depression that the country needed to know about. Dorothea Lange maybe is the most famous migrant mother. A lot of people know the migrant mother photograph. These are by Ben Shahn, and they're very like Walker Evans or Dorothea Lange or Arthur Rothstein, some of those other WPA photographers. Paintings. We'll go back and forth a little bit. Sacco and Vanzetti is the painting that gets into all the art textbooks. Sacco and Vanzetti were two Italian immigrants who were self-professed anarchists and who were nearby when murder took place in Boston. The story is that they were more or less railroaded through the American justice system, that they didn't commit the murder, but that in the initial trial, things were presented in a very prejudicial manner, and they were convicted. And even in the appeal process, things came to light that indicated they weren't guilty, but even the appeal process went against them. So it was seen very much as a travesty of the American justice system. There were demonstrations here, there were demonstrations in Europe and London, which I found very interesting. At any rate, Shahn painted a series of 23 images from this historical event. This is the famous one. This is the one that gets into the books. This is not the living Sacco and Vanzetti. This is after their execution for a murder they didn't commit. Behind them are judges and lawyers and the court building where things went so badly awry for them. Gouache is an opaque watercolor medium. So among other things, I want to point out how Shahn worked in a variety of mediums. He was a printmaker, he was a wonderful sketch artist, he was a wonderful painter. And I thought initially that since this is about great books, and people reading the same books, that I would take quotes from the books, and I put in this one. And then I erred on the side of, I'm really a picture person, so I have way too many pictures for half an hour or 20 minutes, whatever I'm supposed to have. But I'll read this one. This is Ben Shahn. Often I have started to write something and have abandoned it because of the insurmountable difficulties. I found I could say what I wanted to say much more effectively in a drawing or painting. And that is absolutely his strength, was absolutely his strength. He was a visual thinker and presented his ideas, and they're always about people. They're always about social causes, sometimes about politics, but they're always about humanity. And that's what he excelled at. So these are, I put in a couple other images from the series about Saga and Vanzetti. This is a portrait of Saga and Vanzetti, 1927. This is the 4 prosecutors from the early 1930s. And as I said, Saga and Vanzetti is the image that has the most staying power. It's the one that gets in textbooks. It gives art teachers a chance to talk about American history. It gives art teachers a chance to talk about Shahn and his political motivations. He was very left-leaning, but he was very focused on human beings and the problems that we all share. So in The Nation periodical in 1952, this served as the cover. And in 1967, when Shahn was quite a venerable artist on the American art stage, he was asked to do a mosaic mural for Syracuse University. And this, as you see, the famous painting is at the far right, and other images from the series appear in the mural. So having apprenticed, shall we say, briefly with Diego Rivera, he went on and was hired by various New Deal, Depression-era organizations, and he painted some murals, and I couldn't put them all in. I didn't put in the Bronx mural. That was one of his first projects with Bernarda Bryson. They collaborated on it. They were strangely chosen by the committee as the 2 artists to do the mural, and she sort of took a back seat and let him design, and she worked with him as the assistant. They also worked on mural in Washington, D.C. at a national office building. But this is in New Jersey, so of course I'm focusing on New Jersey images. This is in what's now Roosevelt, New Jersey, but I've included the original name of the town, Jersey Homesteads. Jersey Homesteads was founded in 1937. It was a planned community in the New Deal era. There were quite a few, maybe 30 to 40 such communities nationwide. It was specifically planned as a place for Jewish immigrants who worked in fabric, who worked in mills, and shoemaking, and there was going to be a farm component. And the settlement, Jersey Homesteads, didn't quite take off in the way that it was planned, although it became a lovely little community. Shahn and his wife, Bernarda, by now they're married, decided to move there, just try it for a year, and ended up staying there for the rest of their lives. Anyway, this is in the community center, going from, I'm trying to imagine this as a very long mural, and we're going from left to right. Saga and Vanzetti. There's a surprise. Up in the top left corner, we have various Jewish immigrants entering the U.S. and focusing on Shahn's own mother, and Albert Einstein, another big name in New Jersey. Whoops, I pressed the laser pointer, and I hope I didn't shoot right at anyone.
It's in the school.
It's in the school, but my book had community center. Interesting. I haven't been inside to see it. I've driven through Roosevelt, but thank you. So it's in the K through 12, elementary, high school?
Elementary.
Okay. I haven't seen it in person, so I'm relying on a printed source. These are immigrants in work situations, sort of sweatshop situation, running sewing machines and pressing clothing. And workers becoming organized with a union speaker, top left, rallying the cause, rallying the workers, an educational situation, top right. And moving to the far right, we have the people responsible for Jersey homesteads sitting together, working with a big blueprint and laying out the town. Do you live in Jersey homesteads? I mean, in Roosevelt? No, but you've been there. Okay, some other paintings from the same time, and you'll see a theme. These are politically focused paintings and, as I said before, humanitarian causes. Here's a demonstration from 1933 that, according to the book, may have been one reason Tilly, the first wife, was targeted as a potentially suspicious person because she had this painting on the wall of her living room. Scott's Run in West Virginia is notable because it's a Depression-era painting, and I look at this and think maybe those guys are about to jump on the train. There was a lot of train travel that wasn't strictly through ticket purchase, as I understand it. The Whitney Museum bought this for $200 back in the day that it was first exhibited, and even then they thought this is not really as much as we should be paying. But it was an important first step for an artist starting his career. Unemployment, 1938. And Handball, 1939, which I love. It doesn't seem as politically motivated by the others, but it's a group of young men out in an urban setting. And the Shahns did live in New York City before they moved to Roosevelt. So here they are hitting a ball against a flat wall, based on one of Shahn's photographs. So not only did he work in the different media, but he allowed different media to influence each other. There's some give and take between the kinds of art that he made. Roosevelt, New Jersey, Jersey homesteads, due east of Trenton. Arthur Rothstein was the FSA photographer who was sent officially to document the new buildings being constructed in Jersey homesteads. And they're very simple, cinder block, modular, very geometric, what we would now call international style, modern buildings. Very simple and easy to construct was the important part. Some I look at and think they're almost like a Mondrian, if you can imagine them sort of flattened and a few bright colors added here and there. Here's one that's titled Homesteaders, as the family looks at the new home that they've bought. You can see the cinder blocks. And Shahn's house, which was added to over a number of decades, and it looks a lot more beautiful than the basic modular. They added an entire second floor as well as some additional first floor space. So I have a few photographs of Shahn's house, where he and Bernarda raised their 3 children. This is inside, beautiful woodwork. When he added the second floor, the wood was done by a friend who was also an artist, George Nakashima. And this is just beautiful upstairs, although I haven't been inside this either. And it was on the market in 2011. I have no idea who bought it, but it made the newspaper that an artist's home in Roosevelt, New Jersey was on the market. His son lived there for many years. I have a photograph of his son. I think these are actually works by Jonathan Shahn, the son, who lived in the house after his parents lived there, and who lived there apparently until 2011, when I think he retired to a retirement village. This is the back of Jonathan Shahn later in life, in his father's studio, which became his studio. And here he is at work on a very small head carving. He followed his father in the sense that his work is figural and focuses on human beings, but obviously diverged from his father, who made mostly flat, two-dimensional art as a sculptor. And this is a Jonathan Shahn. This is near that school, right down off to the side of the school. And I love this website. There's a girl who posts pictures all around New Jersey and calls herself History Girl. So this History Girl posing with the bust of Roosevelt, for whom the town was later renamed. Various houses in Roosevelt, because I have been through, just not inside all of the buildings. And you can see that with the basic modular unit and the white walls and the geometric construction, which was simple and easy to build, people tried to personalize. So this one has one wall that's a dark olive green and some decorations added to the walls. This is a very simple one with a blue line along the roof. And here's one that departs from International Modern entirely by being painted. 2 colors of green and a red door. So posters. Shahn worked in so many different media, but this is a little text heavy, but he worked for the various administrations during the New Deal and during the Depression. This is for the Office of War Information, Years of Dust, 1937. It's a poster about the Resettlement Administration, which helped farmers in the Dust Bowl states whose crops had failed and whose farms were up for auction, to help them resettle. And this is the one that gets in graphic design textbooks. This is an amazing image from 1942 about a town in Czechoslovakia. I don't know if you can all read it. In red it says, "This is Nazi brutality," and I look at this figure and I think of more recent images from Abu Ghraib, photographers who took pictures of the prison there. But the text is like, what do you call that, ticker tape? Or yellow strip news tape. Radio Berlin, it's officially announced, all men of this town, Lidice in Czechoslovakia, have been shot. The women deported to a concentration camp, the children sent to appropriate centers, the name of the village was abolished. Simple, graphic, hits you over the head with a message. Some posters in favor of FDR, in favor of Roosevelt, who had just in 1944 given that famous 4 freedoms speech. Freedom of speech, freedom of, I've forgotten them all. Anyway, here's clearly FDR, and my other 2 posters from the mid-40s are about registering to vote. Shahn actually did quite a few posters during this period, but some of them were seen as too political and didn't make it into wide circulation. This one I loved. It's colorful, it's got people, it's got the raised hand, the big arm, really a large hand. But also I think with all the flags.
Where is that?
It's a poster that was widely disseminated, and I don't know where this copy is. Library of Congress probably has one. Different collections would have it, but I don't happen to know. What's the trouble with the internet? The glory and the trouble of the internet is that things are widely dispersed, but you don't always know where they started. And I even see it as a tiny bit cubist or abstract. Let's just say abstract. Paintings after the war. I told you I put in a lot of pictures. Ohio Magic, he was there. I have my cheat sheet right in the PowerPoint. He was there as a photographer, documenting conditions in Ohio. But this lovely little cityscape is an easel painting, and it's from the 40s. It's the kind of modernism, slightly abstract, slightly simplified, slightly flattened, that happened a lot in the 1940s. It's obviously not Cubism, it's not Surrealism, it's not those very avant-garde movements. But for Shahn, the image is always important. For Shahn, the human story is always what's important. So it's a charming little town scene with a bus. Father and Child, 1946, has a clear humanitarian concern. It's a fire. There's fire raging behind this couple. He carries out a small child. She carries out some of the important family mementos or artwork. Actually, I think it's a photograph. So I'm looking at it blown up. I can see it a lot better, and it's a family portrait of a woman photograph. Miners' wives. and I think about the flattened plane, the simplification of images, but it's not abstract. It's always about the people and the importance of narrative. And this is obviously the situation for women who are married to minors working in very dangerous conditions, still an issue today. And as we enter the 50s, there are some images that seem less politically motivated, less human in focus, although this is a wonderful one, clarinets. Clarinets and tin horn, 1951. Here's where the face would be, and I think he realized the face would be too distracting. We do see the hands as if it's a musician who's emotional for one reason or another, but the clarinets make a very striking visual pattern across the front of the canvas. Shahn, by the 50s, was starting to have his work used by publishers in New York. He was becoming more and more successful as a commercial artist, but he still picked and chose the types of things that he did. Well, this is a painting from 1953. This isn't, as far as I know, a commercial piece, but I like, again, the simplification and the bright colors and the fact that it still has a human focus. And actually, this is one of my favorites and not well known, but this is Looking Out. Who's looking out? We're looking in. We're looking into what looks like a bedroom on one side and another room, maybe a kitchen or a sewing room, a work room with a tile floor on the right. And it works just beautifully as an almost flat, but not quite flat, geometric painting. But in the mirror of the bureau, we see the woman behind us who's looking out. She's looking out a window. I look at this, and first I thought of Milton Avery, the American painter Milton Avery, who simplified and made very flat colors, beautiful color compositions. And I also thought of the late 19th century French painters, Bonnard and Vuillard. This is a Bonnard. You can see the same themes. Women inside, light coming in, but it's a little more 20th century. The Shahn that I just showed was a little more 20th century and flattened with beautiful color scheme. Graphic work. I meant to look and see how much time it is. Probably just about out. Supermarket, an image from 1957, is also in a graphic design textbook that I've seen. Here's the basic line drawing, signed in the bottom right, Ben Shahn, between two of the little wheels. Charming. I showed this in a talk for children's art, an art talk for children. The big push is the article that it appears in. Here's the same drawing as it appeared in a magazine layout. Very similar, the empty studio. It's a music room, music stands, the chairs that the musicians sit in. Graphic, wonderful, simple, charming. It's just really appealing. Oops. And here's the two-page spread of the way it was used in a magazine layout. And the designers think about all of these things, the gray bar that goes across 2 pages, the white that relates to the background color, the black text, which I can't even read from the front, which relates to the line drawings. Ice cream, what's not to like? Simple line drawing, 3 colors, crabby guy eating a 3-scoop ice cream cone. Here's Shahn in his studio in the 1950s. This is the last section. He did a number of book covers, but they were always books that he could support. They were always authors whose work he wanted to support. So here's Hoffman's short stories, and I just love that portrait of an author on the cover. This is what he did, and this is very New York school of the 1950s and 60s too. They were really interesting, creative, expressive graphic designers. So a swash of mustard yellow, a swash of red. Here's the handwritten title, a little bit of typed text at the bottom, and this whole variety of black ink wash and varieties of textures in black line drawing. I love this, The Rising Gorge. What a title for a book. Perelman is a humorist, was a humorist, I don't know if he's still alive. Same thing again, very simple, colorful shape, which is the same color as the two dotted eyes. Then the wonderful graphics, sketchy quality of the face, the same color as that caption, the title and author, that are in a really interesting creative font. Shakespeare, 1960s, right? 65. Wonderful graphic quality of the hair and the face, and a more detailed patterned look down in the clothing. 2 Time magazine covers. One is Sigmund Freud, 1956, with lovely colorful washes, suggesting the activities of a mind, the inner life. And again, the graphic quality of the drawing with the expression of the face and the very heavy lines that are, it takes a second to read it, his eyeglasses. 1965, the other Time cover is Martin Luther King with a broad wash pattern providing the color to the skin and a wonderful line drawing of this round face in action of speaking. Shahn was given a retrospective at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 1967. This is very near the end of his life. And this was his poster design for it. And I'm just going to say the colors relate, the sketchy quality of the line relates to the drawing. I almost left it out, and then I thought, why? Why leave it out? Shahn and politics, you know, they went together throughout his entire career. But here we have the Dove of Peace, and it's a poster from McCarthy, with an almost pop art striped bird. Couldn't leave out, you have not converted a man because you have silenced him, just as a general statement of the kind of thinking that went behind all of these Shahn pieces. And the last work of art that I wanted to bring up was a temple in Buffalo, New York, stained glass that he did for Temple Beth Zion in the 60s, finished in 1967 and dedicated 2 years before the artist's death. This is the interior of the chapel. He designed the stained glass, he designed a menorah and some other small objects used in the temple. Here's the glass of that front window, and you can just see, it's very abstract, but there's a hand reaching out, it's a right hand, reaching out to the viewer with bright colors and a single flame, a single glowing flame represented in the glass pattern. The outside of the building is interesting. Close up, I think we're so close here that we can barely see the fingers of the hand. Oops. Every now and then I hit the laser pointer. And that's a little pixelated, but it's beautiful colors. If you know the artist Matisse, late in life, Matisse also designed a chapel in the south of France. Stained glass windows and also some line drawings for the walls. Here's that menorah up close that we saw before. And from just around the same time, a lithograph that was printed and widely distributed. And the writing hand, having written, moves on. This is a line drawing of a hand with an ink pen by Shahn, which I present as if it's just written words, the end, because it brings us to the end of the talk. Thank you.
The second book that we're going to feature today is The Idea Factory, Bell Labs and the Great Age of American Innovation. And if all of us who grew up in New Jersey know that AT&T and Bell Labs were an integral part of all of our lives. Author Jon Gertner is going to talk about his work and its significance to New Jersey. And again, this work was chosen because it exemplifies innovation, which New Jersey is so known for, and something that we should be proud of in our 350th anniversary. Jon.
Thanks very much, Pat. I hope you'll forgive me for not having my slides, but they're very technical sometimes. So I'll just talk a little bit about the book and how it fits into this theme today. You know, I think probably the best way to understand what Bell Labs was is to even go back in time to the 1870s, really to the invention of the telephone in Boston. Alexander Graham Bell won the patent for that. And what the telephone did was it turned our vocal waves, the pressure waves, into electrical waves. And it could be sent over wires and through switchboards and over vast distances. So it created this actual instantaneous exchange of information that was much richer than the telegraph or anything that had come before it. By about 1910, 1915, the company that had really capitalized on this great innovation of the 19th century was AT&T, or American Telephone and Telegraph. It was a very different AT&T than the AT&T of today. This was a regulated monopoly. It had permission by the United States government, effectively, to control the telephone service in the United States. And as it turned out, by about 1920, it controlled between 80 to 90% of the phone service in the US. And I think what was interesting and what's important to understand about AT&T at that time was that it wasn't just one company, it was many different companies within this sort of larger umbrella. AT&T controlled all the long distance service in the United States. It controlled either all or part of the local phone companies, New York Telephone, New Jersey Bell, Southwestern Bell, Pacific Bell. It controlled one of the largest manufacturing companies in the world, which was Western Electric, because in this monopolistic control of the phone company, everything, every device that was used in the phone system was made by AT&T. And I think most importantly for me and for this book, in 1924, the executives at the phone company decided that they were going to consolidate all of the research and engineering development for the phone company into one entity. And starting in January 1st, 1925, they created Bell Telephone Laboratories, which was going to be the research and development lab for AT&T. Now, AT&T was the largest company in the world at the time. It was the largest by revenue. It was the largest by employees. By being the largest company in the world, it also was creating the largest laboratory, or corporate laboratory of its time as well. There were kind of models for what a corporate lab should be. Some of the pharmaceutical companies in Germany in the 1800s, late 1800s, had started this. Thomas Edison, of course, had a much smaller lab in New Jersey that influenced some of the people at the phone company. But really, they were taking this idea of corporate science to a whole other level. And when Bell Labs began in 1925, it was about 3,500 people. The first office, the first facility was actually in New York City on West Street, Manhattan, in Greenwich Village. And it really began there for the first 20 years of its life. It was centered in New York. This place really mattered. It didn't just matter to New Jersey, it mattered to the United States, it mattered to the entire post-war economy, it mattered to the future that we live in today. And a lot of what came out of Bell Labs, a lot of what I write in the book, a lot of those innovations, I guess we would really put in that post-war period right after World War II. And coincidentally or not, that coincides with its move to New Jersey. In the early 1940s, the executives at Bell Labs were trying to think about moving to a kind of new laboratory away from the noise and the dirt of the city. I would go back and kind of research this to try and figure out, well, why did they pick New Jersey? They ended up moving the first facility and building it in Murray Hill, New Jersey, which is near Berkeley Heights and New Providence and Summit area. And if you read those early memos about why they wanted to create this new laboratory there, they complain about the vibrations and noise of the city, and they were doing very kind of sophisticated and delicate acoustical experiments. So they really had a kind of scientific reason to move. But you know, as it happens, the head of the Bell Labs also lived in like Milburn and Murray Hill. So they lived like 5 minutes away. So they're really building a laboratory in many ways in their backyard. But what they built in New Jersey, in Murray Hill, which was the first facility, and later on they built another immense laboratory in Homedale, New Jersey, and both of those places actually held about 5,000 engineers and scientists. So they're just tremendously large structures, tremendously large sort of works in progress in terms of the engineering and science that was going on within them. But what they wanted to create was almost a kind of university-type setting where some scientists who were in the research department could really just pursue knowledge. And the engineers, I guess what we might mostly say were in the development department, were solving the kind of nearer term or midterm problems of the phone company. I mentioned that it really mattered. Writing about Bell Labs wasn't just writing about an interesting laboratory, because what came out of there did change the world. I think probably the best example is probably the greatest innovation of the 20th century, the transistor, which was invented at Bell Labs in 1947 by two physicists, Jon Gertner and Walter Brattain, really, in Murray Hill, New Jersey, just off what is now 78 up there. And the transistor was a response to a problem in the phone system. To get a phone call across the country from New Jersey to San Francisco is really difficult. And they found this at the beginning of the century, that phone signals kind of die out after you try and send them a long distance. They attenuate. So what you would have to do is you would have to kind of boost the signal every 50 to 100 miles. They called it a repeater. Repeater tubes were what did it. They were vacuum tubes, they were amplifiers, and they were stationed in these things called repeater stations every 50 to 100 miles as you sent a long-distance phone call across the country. Now, the problem with repeater tubes, or these vacuum tubes, they were kind of a balky technology. They needed a lot of electricity to work. They soaked up, they gave off tremendous amounts of heat. They broke all the time. They could also work as switches, but they were sort of, the switching problems in the phone company had other issues. And the notion of the phone company was maybe they could create another technology that would replace these vacuum tubes, and that would actually kind of harken in an era of electronic communication where you didn't have these kind of old big technologies and something kind of small and electronic that could take their place. And that's what really began that investigation into the transistor. And if you've ever seen the transistor, the first transistor is on display at the old lobby of the old Murray Hill building. It's about the size of the tip of my pinky. And what it did was, you could send a signal, you could send a phone signal through, and in that first transistor, it would amplify that phone signal by 18 times. So you had a very tiny replacement for a very big vacuum tube. And what this meant at first was, as they could see, was it kind of began an era of miniaturization. You couldn't build an iPhone out of vacuum tubes. It would be as big as this building, or bigger. But what the transistor, as it kept shrinking and shrinking, and now you can fit like millions or billions on a chip the size of your pinky, and they can flick on and off, and they can represent digital information. And they are now in the DNA of every electronic device in the world today. Everything you've already used today, whether it's a phone or a laptop, your microwave oven, your refrigerator, there are millions of them in your automobile. So you can get a sense of how important this invention really was. And what I think is also interesting about Bell Labs is that was just one thing that they came out with. It was a kind of example, I think, of a laboratory being in the right industry, in the right place, at the right time, with the right amount of funding, because remember, they're connected to the phone monopoly, so they had a lot of money to work with. They could think really long term, because they didn't necessarily have competitors. They eventually, towards the end of their kind of monopoly, before it was broken up in the 80s, that field did get more competitive. But apart from various complaints, some of which were legitimate, some of which were not, that they weren't moving fast enough to innovate, they really could think long term. So they could bring in these radical new technologies like the transistor, and they could slowly integrate them into these electronic communication systems over the course of 20 or 30 years. In a way, I think that's very different from what companies can do today, where everything's faster, 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 much more profit-driven. There are advantages to that. We get new technology really, really fast in some instances, but it's very much harder, I think, to bring in these kind of radical, or what in the jargon of innovation we call disruptive innovations into the public sphere, because it's very expensive, it's very difficult, it's very complex to kind of substitute a new technology like the transistor for something, a system that's already up and running well enough. In addition to the transistor, and I tell these stories in the book, Bell Labs is responsible for the silicon solar cell, which is the ancestor of every solar panel in the world today. Again, invented a few years after the transistor in the early 1950s. From the beginning, it had problems of economics. It worked very well in terms of harnessing the power of the sun and transforming that into electricity, but it was expensive from the beginning. They understood that, and as we can see now, with how long a brand new innovation takes, it's been about 60 years, and finally we're, I think, getting to the point where solar power is really making these inroads into the market and into the culture, but again, it gives you a kind of sense, I think, of how long it can take for something brand new to really have impact and scale like that. Transistor, the silicon solar cell, digital communications, that whole idea that maybe we won't send communications by waves, which was the old way, but send them through these discrete ones and zeros of digital coding. Again, out of Bell Labs, which was really kind of revolutionized how that transformation began. Communication satellites came out of Bell Labs as well, so that whole idea of sending signals up into space and down, also a Bell Labs thing. The Unix operating system, which might not mean much to people who don't use computers, but is really the basis for Apple's operating system, and as well as the Android operating system. So, pieces of Bell Labs are not only in the hardware, but also in the software of everything we use today. And again, I think these things have revolutionized the world as a kind of what we call, I think, a platform innovation. There's a lot of jargon in innovation talk, and sometimes we talk about incremental versus disruptive. Incremental is when something new just kind of moves the culture or the economy a little bit, and something disruptive might be something dramatic like the transistor. And then we also talk about consumer innovations versus platform innovations. And what I think Bell Labs was really great at was, and really unique at, I think too, was creating these kinds of platforms on which entire industries could be built. Because what we had with the transistor, it's not something that we go to the store, like the Apple store, and buy the new transistor. This is the stuff that's in the stuff. And it's the platform on which new consumer electronics are built. It allowed us to go to the moon. It allowed us to do so many things that are almost unimaginable without them. And there are arguments that these kinds of things would have been invented eventually, but I think the idea that Bell Labs has so many people in one place working with such concerted effort towards furthering the idea of human communications at that moment where electronics technology was really exploding, and at a moment before Silicon Valley where they could really hire the smartest people in the world to be put in one place to work together, really made this kind of a unique atmosphere, I think. I had mentioned a bit about the Murray Hill Laboratory in New Jersey. Again, Homedale was a laboratory that came a little later in the 1960s. By that point, they were also building laboratories in other places, like Chicago had a very large laboratory for switching. But really the center of the communications industry, not just in the United States, but I think in the world, was really in New Jersey for many, many years. And when I said they had the smartest people in the world, it was before anyone was going to Silicon Valley. It was before people really thought, oh, I can invent something and make $1 billion. And that was just not something that was, in the air at that moment in time. So again, MIT people, Caltech people, everybody kind of converging on these laboratories where it really was a kind of golden age, I think, for New Jersey and for innovation. At a moment where people really look to this place to actually push technology ahead. AT&T had a kind of, it didn't break up and explode at one moment, although the various court cases by the early 1980s mandated a breakup of the phone company. And what happened was when AT&T was broken up, for good reasons in many ways, Bell Labs also shrank in turn because the funding, because its mandate as well to be the R&D lab for the phone company had kind of changed. And little by little, AT&T was broken into pieces. Eventually, I won't go into this very tangled history. If you ever look at a flow chart of what happened to the phone company, they kind of break apart and then different parts combine again. Bell Labs got smaller and smaller. Pieces of Bell Labs broke up. Some went with AT&T, some went with Lucent Technologies. Others went on alone to become semiconductor companies. And what we had was a very much diminished kind of laboratory that still exists today as part of Lucent, but is really nothing like it was in its heyday. Really a laboratory that, as I said, started with 3,500 people. By the late 1950s, it had about 10,000 people. And by the time of the phone company breakup, it had about 25,000 people working there. And again, it wasn't a laboratory stuffed with marketing people or ad people or salespeople. These were technicians, engineers, scientists. So it was a really huge technical organization and just a kind of amazing wellspring of talent, all really within one organization, spread mostly around New Jersey, but also in a few other labs around the United States. I just want to say just a couple quick things because I know I don't want to take up too much time. In the book I wrote, what was, I think, a challenge for me is this laboratory, I think, lasted about 60 years in its AT&T monopoly incarnation, from about 1925, give or take, till about 1984. And how was I going to write about that place? And I really thought about this for years, and what I eventually did do was not just write about the innovations, although I do tell those stories, but try and figure out a certain number of people that I could write about to tell those stories. These were people who were associated with the transistor or the solar cell or digital communications or the communication satellites. And in many ways, writing about those people, my hope was that it would be kind of emblematic of a sort of larger workforce at Bell Labs of brilliant people who, all of whom lived in New Jersey actually, and really strived to kind of further this idea of electronic communications. So I would just leave you on one note. Actually, these people became so much a part of my life that I would sometimes get them in my dreams. And they had all passed away by the time I had written my book. But I really spent years with them in the archives of AT&T, which are also in New Jersey, reading their papers and going through this golden age, I think, of Bell Labs and communications to try and understand it. And I think what came out of it for me, apart from understanding the people, apart from understanding these innovations, apart from understanding this place and its importance to the U.S. and the world, is also just how one laboratory can make such a difference. And I had said, they created new industries through these innovations. And we care about innovation, I think, because it creates a pipeline for the future. The jobs of the future depend upon the innovations of today, especially when we consider how long it can take for them to infiltrate the culture and society. So apart from just creating jobs in industry, I think it just created what must be really trillions of dollars of wealth, and really has just changed the way we live in so many ways. So again, in many ways, I've written the story about labs, and I think it's a story that I found going to libraries all around New Jersey really met with a lot of great interest because so many people had worked at this place, and it was just so exciting to talk to people who had either worked there or knew someone who worked there or had done really interesting work. But again, I think it gave me the opportunity to say, you guys, and you men and women who had worked there really did change the world, and this place really did as well.
Any questions for John? Why don't you mention one of the people that you write about? I mean, what are the characters that you found fascinating?
Sure. Probably the main character is a guy named Mervyn Kelly, who, like a lot of people, came to Bell Labs, really grew up in very modest circumstances. His dad ran a hardware store in Missouri, and this was an era where people would go around the country recruiting for the phone company, and they would go to colleges and find professors who they trusted and said, who's your best student? And Kelly came to New Jersey, actually came to New York in 1917 to work with the phone company. He eventually joined Bell Labs when it was established in 1925, and really became this great visionary of what research and development could do. And I think in my book there are certain archetypes, and Kelly was the great manager and visionary. And he lived in Short Hills eventually, where he settled. But he also was very good at hiring people, and he hired other people who became other archetypes in my book. People who were good at starting stuff, like instigators, people who are idea people. Not necessarily people who are sweated the details, but just always had a brainstorm every day. There's a guy named John Pierce, who's in my book, who lived actually in Berkeley Heights, who was the father of communication satellites. Very wonderful, eccentric person. He was actually my favorite person to write about because he was very funny and just very strange in an endearing sort of way. And probably one person everybody talks about it, who's also in the book, is a guy named Shahn, who was kind of the archetypal genius. unlike most people at Cornell, which was, my daughter's thinking about it. Unlike most people at Bell Labs, which was a very collaborative place where people worked together really on both experiments as well as sometimes these innovations really included tens or dozens or hundreds of people. But Claude Shannon worked alone, and he was a theorist of communications and digital communications, and really came up with a lot of the kind of blueprint, theoretical blueprint for how digital information can be exchanged. And he was a wonderfully eccentric person too, somebody who would ride his unicycle up and down the hallways while smoking cigarettes and juggling at the same time. And really just a kind of wonderful character that was great to write about. He also lived in that area in Morristown, and again, when I was writing the book, all these people had passed away, but sometimes I would go over to their house, and Mervyn Kelly, the fellow who was the great manager, I actually wrote a little letter to people who are living in his house now, and I said, I'm writing this book, and I come over and just walk around the house, and they were really nice. And they said, yeah, come on over. So I went over there, and they gave me a tour of their house, which was great. And the reason I've written this is, I was reading letters of Kelly's in the archives, and it would be like, we had Niels Bohr over for dinner, so just kind of wanted to get a flavor of what the place was like, and to wander around the gardens in the back, so it was really. It was a history that had disappeared in some ways, but the houses were still there, and that was pretty cool.
Any other questions?
Great, thank you.
John, that was great. Out New Jersey for story time, and today we're very honored to have the illustrator Doris Ettlinger here today to talk about this book and some of the other work that she's done. Again, her author, her collaborator, Eileen Cameron, could not be with us, but Doris is going to talk about Gia's Regarded State, again, a really prominent book that our children's librarians love to use.
Thank you. Well, we're going to take things down a notch a little bit, because this is a presentation I do at schools. And when I begin, I introduce myself and explain how I became an illustrator, because kids are curious about that. These are some of the books that I've illustrated. I've been illustrating for 30 years, 40 years, and most recently, in the last 20 years, I've been doing children's books. I'm from Staten Island, and I tell kids that Staten Island should really be part of New Jersey, because we are a lot closer to New Jersey. This is an early drawing. It doesn't look very different than other children's drawings, and I was really into fairy tales, so I have a few different. I have Cinderella, and Snow White, and Rapunzel, and the Count on Dublin, and I was learning cursive. And I was a child of the 50s, and so this is how I learned how to draw, watching TV with John Nagy, and on those matchbook covers where they would have, you could apply to art school, you could draw me, and then I was really liked to copy Archie comics, and so I could tell kids that that's how you start, is just copying. Nowadays they would copy anime, but I would copy comics. And so I got a lot of positive feedback from my classmates. I was a class artist, and so that encouraged me to draw more, because I like attention. And so I would draw my classmates and my teachers, and again, these common characters. And I found that when I got to 7th grade, all of a sudden our textbooks didn't have any pictures at all. And we were reading Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, and I started to draw the characters as I envisioned them. And the kids loved that, because they missed the pictures too. And so little did I know that that's what I would be doing as an adult, is envisioning the word. So after I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and after I graduated, a few little detours, I became an editorial illustrator in New York. So I was doing a lot of work for magazines and newspapers, and Forbes magazine was a regular geek. And so this was an article about being audited by the tax man. And so I had a vision of Gulliver's Travels and landing on, being shipwrecked on Lilliput. And so one of the things that illustration is taking two known elements, two cliches, and combining them to make something original. So this was for the Rhode Island Sunday magazine, and about overcrowding in women's prisons. So I took the cliche of the sardine can and combined it with the images of the women behind bars. So fast forward, we started a family, and when I was pregnant with our second child, we decided to leave Manhattan, and we came out to an old grist mill on the banks of the Musconetcong River near Clinton, between where we look at Hunterdon County from Warren County. And so we raised our children there, and I have my studio on the ground floor. And now I teach watercolor on the third floor. So it's a ever-evolving space that suits us very well. My husband teaches at Hunterdon Central, but he's also a painter. And so he has his studio on the ground floor as well. And so this building has worked out very well for us. It's become part of our identity. So when we moved out, I had two little children, and so I wasn't working as much. So I was drawing what was around me, which were my children. And so here again is an example of how I took two ideas. My daughter, sleeping, and I was looking at Cicely Mary Barker's flower fairies, which were very popular, brought them back. And so I combined them to make an ivy fairy, as my daughter's name. And so this is still one of my favorite pieces. And then I had to do one for my son then. So Benjamin is, I thought of all these Renaissance portraits and how they framed them. And so I combined that with Ben, with our little village in the background, and his guinea pig, whose name was Terminator. So this is my library and studio. And so Jews for Garden State. This is part of Sleeping Bear Press's Discover America State by State series. And Sleeping Bear is out in Ann Arbor, and they started with a couple of books, The Legend of Sleeping Bear, and then Anna's for Mitten, for Michigan, because it's shaped like a mitten. And it just sold so well, they realized they were onto something. So they commissioned authors and illustrators in each state then. And so I was very honored to be picked to illustrate New Jersey. And Eileen Cameron had written the manuscript, and it's a two-tier format with rhymes for a younger child and then expository material for an older child. And it's really a book for any age. A lot of grandparents will buy it to send to their grandchildren who live elsewhere. And it's just a very nice book. There's no mention of turnpikes or sopranos in the book, and so it's all the good things about New Jersey. And of course, if that child had a pumpkin that size on her head, she'd have it. So here's my sketch for the J is for Jersey page in the book. So I start out with the drawing. Usually they're looser than this, but I was using this page to include all the other things that weren't included in the rest of the book. And so this is how it looks inside of the book. And I was commissioned by a school in Bridgewater to do a mural. They had a grant for this new cafeteria, and so I commissioned a couple friends of mine to help me, and so I'm hoping they'll invite me back, because I think there are some gaps. And so what I do very often is I do a paper mural at the school. This is at the Tins Road School in Flanders, New Jersey, and they have me back every year for their New Jersey Day. And so here I created the template, and the children, before I arrived, would draw little significant things to go on the map. And so when I visit, I teach them an easy way to draw the figure, which I call eggs and sausages. So kids in 4th grade often start to become self-conscious about their drawing, and so this gives them a handy way to start. So they draw figures and then put clothes on the figures and cut them out and put them all around. So and then I talk about proud poses, because they're proud to be from New Jersey. And what does your body look like when you're proud? How do you hold yourself? So we talk about body language and facial expression. When I begin a project, I do a lot of research, and I find history fascinating, and I love to do the research, whether it's from a book or the internet or just from my own experience. This is the river behind my house, and the first letter A is for Arrowhead, and so it's about the Lenni Lenape Indians. And I knew that where I live had been a plantation for the Lenape, and so I thought about that they probably saw a similar landscape to what I see. And this is a wonderful book called Digging Among the Indians, and this is all about, it's a novel with lots of great drawings about the Indians in New Jersey. So I put that together in a thumbnail sketch, very small, so I don't get into too much detail. And I had forgotten to leave words for the room for the words, so I had to eliminate a figure over here. So that's my larger sketch. And then I get out my paints and my colored pencils, and there's the finished art. And WX, we combine WX. So W for Washington, X for crossroads of migration of the birds. X is always a tough one. And so I was at Jockey Hollow, and this reenactor let me photograph him, so I used him. And so he appears over here. And so there's my sketch. And so I thought about those birds, those blackbirds you see in March and November, and how they just fill the sky. And then they make those patterns as they swoop around. So I imagine George Washington seeing the same things. It was on his march. And here's Molly Pitcher. And the response to my sketch was, no dead bodies. So I had to lose. And by this time I was getting close to my deadline, so I included a lot of smoke in the picture. So we just have a suggestion of the arms. So there's the smoke. And so here's another little drawing lesson. B is for boardwalk, and rather than doing the boardwalk in the long view, the view from the ocean, I took this view. And so first I constructed this illusion of space with a one-point perspective. And then I did sketches of people, and using Photoshop, I I put them in spots and made them larger or smaller depending upon where they were in the picture. And then I added some seagulls, which were little accents, just put them wherever I liked. And And this one I left till last. R's for reptile. And so this is supposed to be Hattie the Hadrosaur. And there was no, the bones of Hattie are in Philadelphia in some drawers. And so I didn't know quite what to use for reference. And then just before I really had to move on doing the final art, I discovered that in Haddonfield, a sculptor named Jon Gertner had unveiled this wonderful sculpture of Hattie the Hadrosaur. So I got permission to use his sculpture for my illustration, and then I photographed models. And so here he looks very much alike. And S is for short. And so here again, I used the computer to assemble my sketches, which I had done separately. And of course, that roller coaster is And now this is my latest book, This is for Seaglass, so we go from one shore to another shore. And that's my dog Bruce twice, Deuce Bruce. And, another similar shore image. This book, S is for Seaglass, is a book of poetry by Richard Michelson. And so this page was C is for castle and D is for dog. And I like to combine the spread for the two poems. And this is N is for Nautilus and O is for ocean. This I did as a little color sketch like this, and they liked it so much they just used that for the fine art. And R is for rain. It's a nice windy piece.
Can you share with us what children usually ask you when you do a?
Oh, okay.
What was one of the most popular questions that the kids ask?
Gee. I'm drawing a blank here. That's all right. Yes.
How long does it take you to do one of those?
A whole book?
No.
Oh, one illustration?
Yeah, like for the shores.
Anywhere that's a question that a child would ask. Thank you. Like a child. How long did it take me? It would take me, for a double spread, anywhere between 15 and 30 hours. And books, some have been as little as 250 hours for a book to 500 hours. So it's very labor intensive. And so I'm working on a book now. I have my process down, and I have a December 4th deadline. Yes, then kids always ask, how many books have I done? And I've illustrated close to 40 children's trade books, and then another 15 or 20 education books. Yes?
Do you get the text from Cameron and get the inspiration from that, or do you give her the images and she writes the text?
Well, the words always come first when you have an author and an illustrator. When it's when the illustrator is also the author, it really works both ways. And I'm working on some manuscripts, and
Is that difficult?
I flip back and forth. Now I'm to the point where I'm doing the drawings and see what story suggests it's in.
I just had a question about in your book.
Yes.
How you chose, who you chose.
For the inventors. This came to me, I always get my best ideas in the middle of the night. I'll wake up and I'll be lying there and ideas will go to the surface. So I wasn't sure what I was going to do. This is I is for inventors like Vail and Morse, who sent messages by wire, by telegraph, of course. And so there's the author has a whole list of people, including Bell Labs, and what they contributed, all the people from New Jersey. And like bubble wrap, I was fascinated by that, and Band-Aid. And so I was trying, how am I going to get this on my page? So I got the image of a children's pageant, and they're dressed up in costume. So so the author put together the list, and then I picked from that for some visually interesting costumes.
We all loved it at our library.
Oh,
We were all
good.
dancing across departments and everything, so it was
Yeah.
really fun. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, these would be good costumes. So, like a barcode. Okay with that. One year, my son, when he was like 3, we asked what he wanted to be for Halloween, and he said electricity. We were really scratching our heads about that. We finally made a tunic with a lightning bolt, and then my husband got one of those trick light bulbs where you put a coin or oil in your hand and it lights up. And then he had one of those trick buzzers. So, yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our final author this morning will be Holly Metz, who is the author of Killing the Poormaster, a saga of poverty, corruption, and murder in the Great Depression. And I guess anything about New Jersey would have to have a little political intrigue. Let's be fair. This is about New Jersey, and it is about what we're known for, perhaps throughout the country. But New Jersey has a little political intrigue. Holly's book has also won the Humanities Council Award for outstanding work. So Holly will be speaking to us today. We will not be recording this, but you can find a lot of her information on her website, which is thepoormaster.com. On behalf of the New Jersey Library Association, I want to thank our 4 speakers today, who were really extraordinary, and their works have been extraordinary. And I think we're very proud that they were selected to be our One Book New Jersey selections for the 350th anniversary of our state. Their presentations will be presented on our website, and we're really very proud to have them. I want to thank other people who have been involved. Kate Vaslick is here who helped design this beautiful poster for us, which, as I said, was distributed to all the libraries throughout New Jersey to promote our program. And I want to thank Steve for being our videographer this afternoon and doing all the work that he has. And we have the History and Preservation section here who have done so much work on this project. So it's been an extraordinary project, and I think we've had some wonderful books, and we thank everyone who's participated.